for the Muslim community in this country is the fact that we've created a situation where a situation has emerged where, frankly, a Muslim walks down the street and people look at them and say, that person is a potential terrorist, which is grossly unfair. It's tremendously unfair. And I think the real victims of what has happened in recent years have been the law-abiding, hard-working majority of the Muslim community who have been stigmatized by the actions of a small minority. And I think that we need to champion that majority in the Muslim community. I think we as politicians need to be willing to stand up and say, actually, the Muslims in our community are decent people, they're hard-working people, they are good citizens, they are not involved in the troubles that we've seen in recent years, and in many ways they just want to get on with their lives and not have to worry about a stigma that is created by minorities. I think we as politicians should be willing to stand up on behalf of those people and say, do not blame them for the actions of others, because actually the Muslim community in this country is a great asset. It's full of people who I value enormously. I've sat in a number of mosques talking about many, many issues with the communities there. I always find enormous hospitality, enormous warmth and a readiness to talk. These are decent people.
One of the reasons, if you, of course, you must be in touch with your local constituency and your electorate over there, but I've been meeting many people here whilst I've been in England, and there is a certain amount of feeling, and maybe well-wishers of your party may be addressing them, is that the Conservative Party seems to be a little not reaching out to the communities. If it looks like the party of the upper classes doesn't really reach out to the minority communities, specifically the Muslim communities. Perhaps, do you think there is a realization at the top for this change to happen?
I think it's a change that had to happen. I don't think it's simply about the Muslim community. We haven't actually been good over the past 20 years at reaching out to minority communities in this country generally, and that's one reason why. And it's not simply an issue within the Muslim community. You would find in a number of the minority communities a high propensity to vote Labour rather than Conservative. And one of the things that David Cameron has sought to do is to change that. He himself spent several days living with a Muslim family in the West Midlands, trying to understand the issues and challenges they face. We all spend time building bridges with the minority community in this country, listening, trying to seek to understand. Yes, you're right, it's a different approach to the approach we've had in the past, but it's the right one, because what we have to do today in our politics is reflect Britain as it is, not as it was. And sometimes in the past we've tended to look at Britain as it was rather than the Britain as it is, and failed to realise that the job we have to do today is different. And when you look at the Muslim community in particular, I mean, my sense is we share values on a very substantial scale. If you look at the things that Muslim families hold dear, the value of family, the work ethic, an approach to standards in our society, we have a lot in common between our party and the Muslim community, and I think therefore it's absolutely right that dialogue should grow and grow and grow. Not only dialogue, I want more Muslims involved in the Conservative Party, more Muslims standing as Conservatives. We now have the first Muslim to serve in a cabinet or a shadow cabinet in Baroness Varsi. We genuinely want to build ever-increasing ties with the Muslim community with whom we share so many values.
Right. Another question that is, of course, affecting, or the issue that affects the Muslim community here in Britain, is Islamophobia or negative stereotyping. You rightly said earlier that a Muslim living in the street who may be a law-abiding citizen going about his normal way of life, unfortunately gets targeted sometimes. There is Islamophobia is another issue. How do you think that the Conservative Party as a government will be different from the current situation?
I think we have to be absolutely tough on incidents that are unacceptable when they happen. I mean, there's two levels to this. First is the prejudice against people in the Muslim community who are seen as terrorists, ludicrously so, but everyone here, to a greater or lesser extent, will tell a similar story, that it's quite difficult in an environment where Islamic terrorism is so high profile, albeit the preserve of a very small number of people. It has a disproportionate impact on the lives of people who have no connection at all with radicalism, with militancy, with trouble or violence. That's something we really have to address, and I think we as politicians really have to stand up and say, we must not allow the actions of a small minority to tarnish our views of a decent law-abiding majority. That's important.
It also has a relation to what is happening around the world. Like I said, when the Muslims living here see the injustices that took place in Iraq or in Afghanistan or in other places, and the Palestinian people suffering for decades without any resolution, Kashmir issue being unresolved. So whenever there's a potential problem involving the Muslims on the side as victims, there is less effort to resolve it. Whereas on the other side, there's a resolution and immediately implemented. So there's a double standard that exists, which somehow relates itself back to what is happening on the street. Do you think that you realize this as a Conservative party?
Case of Israel and Palestine, for example, the first thing to say is that if we could sort it out tomorrow, we would. I believe very strongly in a two-state solution. I believe the Palestinian people have to have self-determination in an independent Palestinian state, and I think the efforts of the international community should be to achieve that outcome, Israel and Palestine side by side, living in peace, which is what I believe the vast majority of people on both sides want to be the case. There have been terrible acts committed over many, many years in the Middle East. Ideally would move beyond that and try and achieve a situation where we have two nations living side by side in peace and harmony. What I would say is that whether it is in relation to what's happened in Gaza, for example, recently, whether it is a reaction to an international terrorist incident, what we can't tolerate in this country is the political divisions of other parts of the world being played out in this country in the form of violence. So violent attacks on the Muslim community in this country after the terrorist attacks that took place in 2001 and 2005 are completely unacceptable and must be stamped out with the full force of the law. Equally, attacks on the Jewish community after what took place in Gaza must be dealt with in the same way. What we can't do is allow the disputes in other parts of the world to become violence on our streets. And we've got to be very firm in protecting those who are potentially victims. And I think the Muslim community in particular can be victims of prejudice and unfair treatment.
Absolutely.
And require...
I'll give you an example. I mean, you're of course the shadow Home Secretary, and recently certain Pakistani students came here, lots of them come here to study. They are legitimate students who come and sort of come to the British universities, and they were detained, arrested, houses raided, put inside, no access to any lawyers, no access to their families, kept inside for a long time and then released. No charge, mistake.
I think the lesson
now this kind of things have really alienated the community, and what sometimes people expect from the Conservative parties to come out and give a policy that will be different from what is happening now. If you will do the same, then there's not going to be any change as far as the community is concerned.
The big lesson that should be learned from that incident, there will be times, and it won't simply affect the Muslim community because we've experienced terrorism in a variety of forms in this country and in Western Europe, there will be times when the police believe they need to intervene to make arrests in order to prevent something that they may believe is about to happen, or to arrest people they may believe have been connected with a particular offence. I think the mistake that was made in the case of the arrests in Liverpool and in Lancashire was that we failed to reflect the traditional way in this country of dealing with publicity around arrests. If you go back 20 years in this country, when somebody was arrested, it was very much treated as sub judice by the media. Politicians didn't pass comment until there was some...
That is not the reality now. I mean,
no, absolutely, absolutely, I accept that. And I think that politicians, particularly people in senior positions, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, if somebody's arrested, I think the lesson is they should shut up until we know whether that person actually is guilty or is not guilty of an offence. We have a presumption in this country that you are innocent until you're proven guilty, and there are times, and it's a danger in a 24-hour news culture that we fall into the trap.
As a sort of beacon or a torchbearer of human rights, and when things like this happen in Britain, it really upsets people.
But you ask how we're different. We as a party campaign vigorously against an extension of the time you can detain someone without charge from above the existing 28 days. The government wanted to increase that to 90 days. Now, if you imagine somebody who's in a position where they're arrested and they're kept in detention for 90 days, during that 90 days, which is the equivalent effectively of a 6-month sentence with the normal remission, during that time they'd lose their job, they might well lose relationships, they might well lose their home. And at the end of it, if that person is found not to have been guilty of any offence, you're much more likely to have radicalised them than the other way around.